Good afternoon, everyone. Let me start by addressing the tragic incident in northern Gaza today, where more than 100 Palestinians are reported to have been killed and many more injured. I first of all want to express the United States' deepest condolences to the families of those who died. Far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed over the course of this conflict, not just today, but over the past nearly 5 months. And when you think about today's tragedy, it is especially heartbreaking to consider how many of those families affected will be burying loved ones not for the first time. In fact, I'm sure that many of those affected have buried multiple loved ones since this conflict began. When it comes to establishing facts on the ground, we are urgently seeking additional information on exactly what took place. We have been in touch with the Israeli government since early this morning and understand that an investigation is underway. We will be monitoring that investigation closely and pressing for answers. This tragic event also underscores the importance of expanding and sustaining the flow of humanitarian assistance into Gaza in response to the dire humanitarian situation, including through a potential temporary ceasefire as part of a hostage deal. If there's anything that the aerial footage of today's incident makes clear, it is just how desperate the situation on the ground is. People need more food. They need more water. They need medicine and other humanitarian goods, and they need it now. We continue to make clear in all of our discussions with the government of Israel that all possible measures must be taken to allow the entry of more assistance into Gaza through as many points of access as possible, and to enable safe and secure distribution of that aid throughout Gaza. But as we have said before, the best way to alleviate the ongoing suffering of the Palestinian people is to reach an agreement for a temporary ceasefire that would get hostages out, enable more aid to come in, and allow that aid to move everywhere inside Gaza. We continue to work day and night to achieve that outcome, including through calls the President held this morning with President al-Sisi of Egypt and the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim, as well as one Secretary Blinken held earlier today with Qatari Prime Minister al-Thani. Every leader on those calls agreed that this terrible event underscores the urgency in bringing the hostage talks to a close. We continue to believe a deal is possible, and that a deal is in the interests of Israel, the Palestinian people, and the broader region, and we will continue to push for it to be concluded as soon as possible. So with that, Matt.
Yes, thanks. So on that, what is your understanding of what happened?
So our understanding is that there was a commercial convoy delivering humanitarian assistance, that there were no UN agencies involved. They were delivering assistance, and then beyond that, we have seen obviously conflicting reports. We've seen the reports from the government of Israel. We've seen accounts from local Palestinians who were on the scene. We don't have ground truth on what happened. We know what we've seen people say publicly, and we're seeking more information and looking for the results of the investigation, as I said in my opening comments.
Understanding that you don't have anyone on the ground and you don't know, all you have to go on right now, I presume, are what you've heard from the Israelis, what you've heard from witnesses, and the footage that you've seen. Based on all of that, you know, what can you say about what it appears happened?
I don't want to draw any conclusions about what appears happened, because I think it's too early to say. Oftentimes the early accounts in these situations have turned out to be incorrect. But two things are clear. One, just from the aerial footage, you can look at that and right away conclude the situation is incredibly desperate. That people are swarming these trucks because they're hungry, because they need food, because they need medicine and other assistance. And that tells you that we need to do more to get humanitarian assistance in. And then the second thing is that too many Palestinians died today, as has been true far too many days since October 7th. And so that's why we continue to push for a temporary ceasefire agreement that would alleviate the suffering of the hostages that continue to be held by Hamas and get them home to their families, and that would alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people.
Well, when you say too many Palestinians died today, does that mean that there is some kind of acceptable number of?
The acceptable number is zero. The acceptable number is 0 of innocent Palestinians. I'm differentiating that from Hamas fighters, obviously, but the acceptable number of innocent Palestinians dying is 0.
All right, and then last one. So you talked about how it's important to expand aid deliveries, but also to increase the access points. You've been speaking publicly and privately for weeks now about your push for the Israelis to open the Erez crossing for aid deliveries. How is that going?
I don't have any updates on it other than it continues to be a high priority for us. And if you look at the situation today, the reason we have been pushing for an opening of a crossing in northern Gaza is because we know that the situation there is incredibly dire. Even when you've had assistance flowing, not enough assistance flowing ever, but certainly over the past few weeks, not enough assistance flowing in the south, at least there has been assistance getting in. The situation north has been much more difficult because of the difficulty of trucks traveling all the way from the south to the north and the difficulty of guarding those trucks, which I think is one of the things that we saw today. So we continue to push for a northern crossing to be open, continues to be a high priority for us, but I don't have an update on it.
Thank you.
Sean.
Some elements of that. You're talking about the safe delivery of aid. The Israeli military being there. I mean, do you have an idea what the situation was, and is this? Are there risks in this in itself, and having the military so closely near aid delivery?
I don't have any updates other than what I've seen the Israeli military say publicly, which is that there were military stationed there, not as part of the aid, but I think it was either as a checkpoint or a normal military staging facility. So I think the obviously, whenever you have a military operating in any area, you have a risk of misunderstanding, you have a risk of miscalculation, you have a risk of civilian casualties. That is an ongoing risk as long as there is an ongoing military operation. But you also see that risk increase now because of, as I said earlier, how desperate people are, right? Just look at the footage and you can see the people swarming those trucks are desperate. They need food. And so whenever you have that kind of situation, you have the risk not just of harm from military action that goes wrong and unfolds in a way that no one anticipates or no one wants, but you also have a heightened risk of accident, you have a heightened risk of criminal activity, you have all of these heightened risks to innocent people who are just trying to get food and water and medicine and things that they need to feed their families and make their families comfortable and try to keep their families safe. And so that's why you hear me keep saying we are trying so hard to get this temporary ceasefire agreement to release the hostages, because it would do so much to alleviate every problem that the Palestinian people are facing now. It would allow us to get more aid in. It would allow aid to be delivered safely throughout Gaza, and it would allow people in Gaza more freedom of movement to move around and get to aid and get to their homes and get to their neighborhoods. So it is urgent that this agreement be reached, and that is why you see the president and the secretary and others in the United States government pushing so hard to get it over the finish line.
And just when you say that the United States is pressing for answers, in what form does that take? I mean, have there been calls initially, and to what extent will the U.S. follow up on that? Is there talk about accountability already?
Again, I think it's appropriate to let the investigation unfold and see what it produces. But I can tell you, we were in touch at senior levels with the government of Israel early this morning, U.S. time. Obviously, Israel is 7 hours ahead of us. So by the time we woke up here, people in Israel in the embassy were already in touch, and those contacts were followed up by people here in the State Department pushing for answers and we're told that there's an investigation. We'll look to see what the results of that investigation yield and what further measures, if any, are appropriate. Jenny, go ahead.
President Biden said that he believes that this will complicate the negotiations to secure that ceasefire and free the hostages. Can you give us any details about what's underlying his assessment there?
I want others to say it very well could, but the reason you saw the president on the phone with the president of Egypt and the emir of Qatar, and the reason you saw the secretary on the phone with the prime minister of Qatar, is to try and push past this situation and to try to make clear that, in fact, this incident today, this tragedy today, just underscores why we need to get a hostage deal and why we need to get a temporary ceasefire as soon as possible. So it may very well complicate it, but our hope is that it will not, and we are going to push very hard to try to get a deal over the line.
And can you give us any more details on what other measures the U.S. is considering to try to get aid into Gaza? We've seen reports of potentially airdrops. Is there any
So there are a few. So we continue to try to improve the distribution system and work through that with the government of Israel and the United Nations, and try to find a way to unstick this problem that we have right now with providing security to convoys of assistance. We also continue to explore other measures. I'm not going to get into what those are from this podium, but we continue to consider a number of other possible measures to get assistance in, as well as working with other countries to get assistance in. You saw the government of Jordan facilitate an airdrop earlier this week, something that we very much support. But again, it's not to say that we are not focused on those, because we are, and those would help immediately. But the real solution here to this is to try to get, I should say, an agreement that would dramatically increase the flow of assistance in, and help with the distribution problems, and help with the problem that civilians face of being able to move safely to get to aid when it actually does make it in.
And is there any discussion about any other crossings in the north of Gaza beyond Erez being opened?
All I can say about that is that we continue to push for crossing in the north to be open, and I'll leave it at that. Simon.
Crossing specifically, could you, I mean, a lot of people will be looking at this and saying, you're the main supporter of Israel. Israel is completely in charge of this crossing, the Erez crossing, and other border crossings, and that could potentially open up aid to northern Gaza. We see these images, as you say, it demonstrates the desperation that people are feeling. Why is Israel unable to open that border?
So there are a number of security and technical challenges that they have been willing to work through. They can, of course, speak to those directly. I won't try to speak for them, but I will speak on behalf of the United States and say that the Secretary has made clear directly in conversations with Israeli government partners, and as of others in the United States government, that we want to see a crossing open in the north as soon as possible. You may recall that it was our intervention and our push that got Rafah first open for humanitarian assistance, and then our push that got Kerem Shalom open for humanitarian assistance. In both those cases, it's not something that happened overnight. It's something that we pushed for repeatedly, and we're eventually able to achieve. And we are hopeful to eventually be able to achieve the opening of a crossing in the north, because we think it's incredibly important.
So are you telling the Israelis that you don't think that those security, whatever concerns they have, are enough to justify keeping that border closed? I'm
not going to get into our private conversations, but I will say that we do continue to press with them the urgent importance of opening a crossing.
And there's been this question of the Israelis targeting Palestinian police who in other instances are guarding aid. As Sean was getting at, we seem to have an incident here where the Israelis have ended up involved in securing aid that's being delivered. What does the US have like a vision or a plan for how aid delivery should be secured, given the kind of chaos that we've seen today?
I'm not at a point where I can discuss those details publicly. It's something that, as I said earlier, we are engaged with the government of Israel as well as the United Nations, who provides most of the convoys coming in. They provide most of the humanitarian assistance coming in, but then there are, as we saw today, some commercial convoys that are coming in as well, delivering goods that are available for sale. So we're continuing to work through that situation and trying to get it solved as quickly as possible. Our special envoy, David Satterfield, has been engaged with it, but I just don't have it. I just can't get into the details publicly, unfortunately. Said, go ahead.
Thank you. You don't have any doubt that only one side did the shooting and the killing and the shelling and so on of these people, correct?
Said, I have seen reports I have seen different reports with respect to that very question.
Right.
We don't know, as I said earlier, the ground truth of what happened, which is why we think it's appropriate that investigation be conducted.
So you think that there were other people shooting Palestinians?
Said, I said I have seen reports that other people were shooting. I don't know the veracity of any of those reports, which is why we're seeking more information.
And you expect to get any results from these investigations, these reports? Will you come back to us next week and tell us this is?
I can't promise you next week because I don't know how long an investigation will take. But hold on. Certainly, when an investigation is completed and we're briefed on that investigation, I'm happy to come brief you on that.
On the principle of it, why is it so difficult for this government to say we condemn the killing of children, Palestinian women and children? Why can't you say the word condemn?
We do. Said, if you listen to what I said a moment ago,
hold
on. Said, please don't interrupt me.
Yeah?
I said far too many Palestinians have died. Thousands of Palestinian children have died, and it is a tragedy when one of them dies. Of course, we don't want to see a single child die. We don't want to see anyone die as a result of this conflict, which is why we have been working to bring this conflict to a close as soon as possible. But whenever you ask me these questions, I do think you continue to kind of just elide over the fact that Hamas bears a great deal of responsibility for putting those children in harm's way. Remember, it was Hamas that launched this war in the first place with an attack on Israel that killed men, women, and children, and that Hamas that hid and continues to hide behind children as human shields. So yes, we do not want to see any child die. We don't want to see any innocent civilian die, which is why we are working so hard to try to achieve a temporary ceasefire that would alleviate their suffering.
Yet I have not heard the word condemn. I mean, this war began way before October 7. I mean, in fact, the reason that this administration was so strong on, pursuing a Middle East peace and so on, because the war has been going on for decades before and so on. We heard this administration when they came into office talking about reopening the consulate, talking about reopening the PLO office here, talking about restarting and reigniting peace talks and so on, re-aiding UNRWA and so on, simply because that war has been going on for a very long time. Because Gaza was under siege for a very, very long time.
Saeed, nothing that happened before October 7th justifies what Hamas did on that day. And it is what Hamas did on that day that led to the outbreak of this war and led to the suffering of so many innocent Palestinians. And I just feel it's important to correct that fact.
That's fine. I mean, you guys said this many times before, but in fact, Israel has been waging war on Gaza for a very, very long time. Let me ask you on the aid issue, on the trucks and the trailers and so on. Is there anyone other than Israel that is holding the aid from going in?
It is not a question of aid going in. That's not the problem right now, Saeed. The problem is that when aid gets in, there's a distribution problem inside Gaza right now because there are police officers, some of whom are members of Hamas, who have been providing the security for those for that distribution inside Gaza. And what Israel says is that they have a legitimate right to go after members of Hamas. So we would obviously prefer to see members of a security force inside Gaza who are not Hamas members, but that's not where we are today. So it is a situation that we continue to try to work through.
So this is really the classic catch-22 kind of situation because Hamas governed Gaza for a very long time. All of the police, all the many of the security forces and so on. Unless you supply Gaza with police and other staff people, whatever, who are from Egypt, from anywhere, to distribute these things, it's going to be the same people to distribute it.
As I said, it is
so this is really, you're saying, okay, you can't, it's a catch-22 situation.
I don't think you're listening to what I said. What I said is we believe the way to ultimately solve this problem is to try to get a temporary ceasefire that would get hostages out and alleviate this problem and make it possible for aid to move around and get food in people's mouths so they're not so hungry and they're not so desperate that they're swarming the convoys that do come in.
Last question. One last question. Do you suspect that Mr. Netanyahu perhaps authorized this raid to scuttle the negotiation?
There is no evidence of that I have seen. Said, go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. You keep saying that you don't want to see any Palestinian civilians dead, and the number of civilians should be 0. But you saw the numbers, I'm sure you did today. They're staggering. There are 30,000 dead, 70,000 wounded, and 7,000 are missing. With due respect, Matt, many people in the Arab and Muslim world do not believe that this administration is sincere when they keep saying the same message that we don't want to see Palestinians dead for many reasons. Number one, you supply Israel with lethal weapon with no conditions and no reviews as much as we asked about it. And second is you shelter them in the Security Council and you still sided with Israel that no ceasefire till now. You want a short pause and it didn't work out. So how can you respond to people who criticize this administration that actually you're the one who's supporting the Israelis?
So I would turn it around with a question, not to you, because I know that's not the way this exchange is supposed to work, but to anyone that wants Israel to stop the war unilaterally. What is their solution to the Hamas leadership that launched the attacks of October 7th and continue to be at large? What is their solution to the thousands of Hamas fighters who continue to be operating inside Gaza and continue to say that they are committed to the destruction of the state of Israel, say that they're continue to be committed to the intentional murder of Israeli civilians. So anyone that is asking the question about Israel and Israel's conduct in this campaign, which are fair questions, and that's why we stand up here and answer them, also needs to ask questions about Hamas's culpability and Hamas's side in that, because this is a difficult problem, and we continue to believe that Israel has a legitimate right to go after terrorists that are right across its borders, right in Gaza, that are committed to the destruction of the state of Israel and are committed to killing Israeli civilians. But we want them to do it in accordance with international humanitarian law, and it is important that they do that. Again, as I've said before, if Hamas came out and laid down arms, all of this could be over today. All of it, every bit of it.
The only difference is we are journalists covering the State Department, so.
That's why I made clear. That's why I made clear I'm not asking the question to you. I'm very aware.
Other journalists
Yeah.
hold Hamas. But another question. Senator Kuhn said today that if Israel does not present a secure and credible plan to evacuate civilians, 1.5 million from Rafah, then he's willing to consider restriction on arms sales to Israel. And this is an advanced position from a senator that's very close to the Biden administration. So do you believe now you start losing the argument even in Congress? And do you support that at one stage that even this administration will impose arms restriction?
I think it's important that we take things one step at a time. And where we are today is that we have said we cannot support an operation in Rafah unless there is a credible and executable plan to deal with the more than 1 million civilians who are sheltering there. And we have not yet seen such a plan. We haven't been briefed on such a plan, and we can't support it until we see that plan. And so to speculate about what may happen down the road, I of course can't do. I can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow, but I'll take it one step at a time and say right now there's not a plan in place that we have seen that we can endorse.